I never thought loyalty could be a weakness until I spent 3 years working for my father-in-law, Henry Harrington. My name is Richard. I am 58 years old, and for the last 36 months, I was the invisible glue holding Vanguard supply network together. My wife, Sarah, always warned me about mixing family and business. She knew her father better than anyone. Henry was a man who measured respect in dollar signs and evaluated people based on how much they could feed his ego. But when Henry offered me the position of Senior Operations Director, I saw it as a genuine opportunity. Vanguard was a logistics empire on the edge of a massive collapse, and I had spent 3 decades mastering supply chain operations. I honestly believed I could save his company and earn his respect. I was wrong on one count. I saved the company, but respect was never on the table. For 3 years, I worked 70-hour weeks. I spent my mornings putting out fires with local distributors and my nights drafting international supplier agreements. I was the one who fixed their broken inventory systems. I negotiated the massive contract with North Axis Distribution, a deal that single-handedly increased Vanguard's profit margins by 22%. But in Henry's eyes, I was never the operational expert who rescued his failing business. I was just his daughter's husband. He loved talking about meritocracy and earning your place, but his definition of fairness meant keeping me entirely in the shadows while giving public credit to people he wanted to impress. I was the ghost in the machine, the guy solving catastrophic problems at midnight, but nobody outside my immediate team even knew my name. I stayed because I genuinely believed that results would eventually outweigh nepotism. I thought the numbers would speak for themselves. I thought saving him from a multi-million-dollar disaster would matter. Then came Oliver. Oliver was 22 years old, the son of Henry's wealthiest country club friend. He arrived at Vanguard with a fresh business degree, a perfectly tailored suit, a confident smile, and absolutely zero practical experience. Henry personally walked him around the office on his first day, introducing him to every department head like he was the second coming of industry innovation. I had bled for that company for 3 years and still had to fight for a parking spot. Oliver was given a corner office with a panoramic view of the city on his first morning. When Henry introduced us, he told Oliver to shadow me. "Richard knows the ropes," Henry had said, clapping the kid on the shoulder. "Learn everything you can from him." So I did my job. I sat down with Oliver and walked him through the supplier agreements. I explained the complexities of our logistics network. I specifically warned him about the North Axis contract. That contract was a beast, layered with strict performance clauses and a very specific key person provision I had baked into it. The provision essentially stated that if the primary account manager, me, was removed without the supplier's explicit approval, the contract could be declared void ab initio, meaning it would be completely nullified from the very beginning, as if it never existed. I explained this to Oliver in plain English. He just nodded and smiled, typing aggressively on his laptop. I knew he didn't grasp a single word of the legal consequences. He was too busy adjusting his expensive watch. A few weeks later, whispers started echoing through the break room about Project Apollo. Project Apollo was my masterpiece. It was a massive expansion initiative, a completely restructured logistics system that I had spent the last 14 months developing. My team and I built the entire framework from scratch. We eliminated shipping delays, optimized warehouse efficiency, and created a launch-ready strategy that was going to transform Vanguard from a regional player into a national powerhouse. For the first time in years, I felt a genuine spark of hope. I thought this was it. This was the undeniable triumph that would force Henry to acknowledge my value. I had handed him the future of his company on a silver platter. Then, Sarah came home from a family lunch looking conflicted. She sat me down and gently held my hand. "My dad told me you built the entire foundation for the new expansion," she said softly. "He said it's going to change everything." I wanted to believe that this was his way of finally giving me my due. I prepared an exhaustive executive summary, printed the final launch protocols, and sent them to Henry, waiting for the green light to officially lead the rollout. His response? A single casual thumbs-up emoji sent via text message. Later that afternoon, I walked past the executive dining room. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, I saw Henry, Oliver, and Oliver's father sitting around the mahogany table. They were laughing, drinking premium sparkling water, and reviewing the Project Apollo blueprints. My blueprints, my ideas, my sleepless nights. They were discussing the launch phases and the projected revenue as if I didn't even exist. And suddenly, with crystal clarity, I understood exactly what was happening. Henry hadn't asked Oliver to shadow me so he could learn how to help me. He had asked him to shadow me so he could replace me. Henry was preparing to take my life's work and hand it to a 22-year-old kid just to secure his social standing at the country club. I walked back to my desk, the anger turning into a cold, calculated calm. I wasn't going to yell or throw a tantrum. I was going to let them make their move, and then I was going to pull the floor out from under them. A few days later, Henry called an all-company meeting. The email went out with high priority, demanding every single employee gather in the main conference room. The air in the room was thick with anticipation. Everyone knew Project Apollo was ready for launch. They knew the endless hours my team and I had poured into it. They expected a celebration of our hard work. Henry walked into the room wearing his most expensive navy suit, beaming like a proud father. Right beside him, looking completely out of his depth, but trying his best to appear authoritative, was Oliver. Henry took the microphone and started talking about the future. He spoke about growth, about pushing boundaries, about bringing fresh blood into the leadership pipeline to revitalize our strategies. He threw out buzzwords like synergy, paradigm shift, and dynamic restructuring, words that meant absolutely nothing to the people who actually moved the freight. I stood in the back of the room, leaning against the cold wall, watching the performance. Then Henry reached the climax of his speech. "And that is why," he announced, his voice echoing through the silent room, "I am incredibly proud to introduce the new Strategic Innovation Lead for Project Apollo. Please give a warm Vanguard welcome to Oliver." The silence in the room was deafening. Dozens of eyes instinctively darted toward the back of the room where I was standing. Everyone in that building knew who had created Project Apollo. Every department head had sat in meetings with me. Every warehouse manager had reviewed my blueprints. They all knew who actually deserved that position. But Henry did not even look in my direction. He did not mention my name once. There was no thank you for the 3 years of dedicated service. There was no acknowledgement of the 14 months of development. It was as if I had never existed, as if Oliver had conjured the entire strategy out of thin air. I did not scream, I did not storm out, I simply smiled, raised my hands, and clapped politely along with the scattered, uncomfortable applause. I was done. I was entirely done waiting for a man blinded by his own ego to recognize my value. I walked back to my desk, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out a fresh notebook. The transition was going to be seamless on my end, mostly because I was about to remove myself from the equation entirely. I spent the next hour drafting a polite resignation letter. No accusations, no anger, just a simple notification of my immediate departure. 2 hours after the meeting concluded, Oliver appeared at my cubicle. He was holding a stack of papers, and the confident smile he had worn during the presentation was completely gone. He dropped the papers on my desk. It was the North Axis distribution contract. "Richard," Oliver started, trying to sound casual but failing miserably. "Can you explain this section to me again? The supplier is asking for a confirmation on the liability caps, and there is a clause here I don't quite understand. Something about the primary manager status and a void condition? I need to send them a reply before the end of the day." I looked at the contract, then I looked up at Oliver. The panic in his eyes was genuine. He was completely out of his depth, drowning in legal jargon that he had no business handling. "That," I said softly, leaning back in my chair, "is the void ab initio clause we discussed last week, and explaining how to navigate it is no longer my responsibility." Oliver blinked, confused. "What do you mean? Henry said you would help me transition." I smiled again, stood up, and picked up my printed resignation letter. "I am transitioning, Oliver. Good luck with the launch." I left him standing there, his mouth slightly open, and walked straight toward the executive suites. Henry was sitting behind his massive desk, reviewing charts on his monitor. When I knocked and entered, he looked up and smiled, a fabricated expression of warmth. "Richard, come in. I hope you are ready to fully support Oliver during this transition phase. He is going to need your expertise to get things moving smoothly.
I did not say a word.
I walked up to his desk, placed the crisp white envelope directly on top of his keyboard, and took a step back. Henry frowned, looking at the envelope. "What is this?" he asked, his tone shifting to slight annoyance. "My resignation," I replied calmly. His head snapped up. The color instantly drained from his face, only to be replaced a second later by a deep, furious crimson red. "You are joking, right?" he barked, standing up so fast his chair hit the window. "Is this because of the announcement? Are you really throwing a childish tantrum over a title?" "I am not throwing anything, Henry," I said, my voice steady. "You made a strategic business decision regarding the leadership of Project Apollo. I am simply making my own strategic decision regarding my career." He slammed his hand on the desk. "You cannot just walk out. We are launching in 2 weeks. You have responsibilities." I looked at him, feeling absolutely nothing but pity for a man who had orchestrated his own downfall. "I had responsibilities," I corrected him. "Now Oliver has them. Congratulations on the decision." I turned around and walked out of the office. I did not look back. There was no dramatic shouting match, no tearful goodbyes. I just packed my personal belongings, handed my badge to the security guard, and walked out into the afternoon sun, feeling lighter than I had in 3 long years. The first few days of my newly found freedom were incredibly peaceful. I spent my mornings drinking coffee on the back porch with Sarah, finally able to enjoy a sunrise without my phone vibrating every 5 seconds. I started reading books again. I fixed the squeaky hinge on the front door that had been annoying us for 6 months. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like a human being instead of a machine built exclusively to manage crisis after crisis. Sarah was fully supportive of my decision. She had watched her father take advantage of my dedication for years, and while she loved him as a parent, she held zero illusions about his ruthless business tactics. She knew exactly what was coming for Vanguard Supply Network, and she was right. It only took 2.5 weeks for the dominoes to start falling. The first hint of disaster came through an industry connection. An old friend of mine, who worked as a senior auditor at one of Vanguard's partner firms, called me on a Tuesday afternoon just to check in. He mentioned casually that there were massive logistical delays happening at Vanguard's central hubs. According to him, the entire rollout of Project Apollo had stalled completely. The warehouses were overloaded, shipping schedules were completely unsynchronized, and the executive team was in full panic mode. I thanked him for the update, hung up the phone, and took a long sip of my coffee. The machine I had built required constant calibration. Handing the keys to a 22-year-old kid with a shiny degree and no practical experience was like asking a toddler to fly a commercial airplane. A catastrophic crash was not just a possibility, it was an absolute certainty. Then, the real chaos began. North Axis Distribution, the absolute cornerstone of Vanguard's supply chain, officially halted all outgoing shipments. I heard the details from a former colleague who had managed to retain my personal number. According to the colleague, Oliver had tried to renegotiate a minor shipping rate, acting with the arrogant confidence of someone who thought business was played like a video game. North Axis did not just reject the renegotiation. Their legal department immediately invoked the key person clause I had embedded into the original contract. Because I, the primary account manager, was no longer overseeing the partnership, and because Henry had failed to secure explicit approval for the management transition, North Axis declared the entire contract void ab initio. In a matter of 48 hours, Vanguard lost its biggest supplier. The fallout was immediate and devastating. Other suppliers, observing the collapse of the North Axis deal, started getting nervous. The logistics industry is incredibly small, and word travels faster than freight. When smaller distributors realized that the architect of Project Apollo was no longer at the company, they began delaying their own shipments, demanding updated liability clauses, and refusing to sign off on Oliver's disorganized directives. The carefully constructed network I had spent 3 years building was unraveling at a terrifying speed. Vanguard was hemorrhaging money, orders were severely delayed, clients were furious, and the entire company was standing on the edge of a financial cliff. The company that thought I was entirely replaceable suddenly realized precisely how much they needed my expertise to survive. Exactly 32 days after I handed in my resignation letter, my phone rang. I was in the garage, organizing my tools, when the screen lit up with Henry's name. I let it ring 3 times before finally pressing the answer button. "Hello, Henry," I said, my voice calm and neutral. There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. When he finally spoke, all the arrogance, all the false bravado, and all the condescension were completely gone from his voice. He sounded exhausted. He sounded desperate. "Richard," he began, coughing nervously, "how have you been? Sarah doing well?" "We are doing great, Henry, enjoying the time off." "What can I do for you?" I asked, knowing exactly why he was calling. Another heavy sigh echoed through the speaker. "Listen, Richard. We have run into some unexpected challenges with the Project Apollo rollout. The transition with Oliver has not been as smooth as we anticipated. North Axis is being incredibly difficult regarding some contractual obligations, and they are specifically requesting to speak with you." He paused, clearing his throat again. "I know we had our differences, but the company needs you. I was wondering if you might consider coming back, perhaps on a temporary basis, just to help smooth things out and get the project back on track." I stood in my garage, surrounded by silence, and let a slow smile spread across my face. The man who had ignored my efforts for 3 years, the man who had handed my masterpiece to an unqualified intern, was now begging for my help. The person they refused to value was now the only one capable of saving them from the fire they had started themselves. "I will certainly consider it, Henry," I replied smoothly. "But if I return to fix this mess, it will not be as your employee. It will be as an independent consultant. And this time, I will be the one creating the terms, not you." I did not wait for his response. I ended the call, placed the phone on my workbench, and went back to organizing my tools. The balance of power had officially shifted, and I was holding all the cards. Within 48 hours of that phone call, I officially registered my own independent consulting firm. I spent a full day working with a corporate attorney to draft the most aggressive, ironclad consulting agreement I could possibly imagine. If Henry wanted me to save Vanguard's supply network from total collapse, he was going to pay a premium for it. I structured my fees to be astronomical, demanding a massive upfront retainer and a significant percentage of the ongoing revenue generated by Project Apollo. I also included a non-negotiable clause stating that I would have absolute operational control over the project, bypassing Henry and the executive board entirely. I sent the contract over to his legal department on a Thursday morning and waited for the inevitable explosion. It did not take long. Henry called me less than an hour later, shouting so loudly I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "Are you out of your mind?" he yelled, completely abandoning the desperate, apologetic tone he had used earlier in the week. "This contract is extortion. You are asking for compensation that rivals my own salary, and you want complete autonomy over the division? I am the chief executive officer of this company, Richard. I make the decisions." I listened to his tirade patiently, staring out the window at the quiet street in front of my house. When he finally ran out of breath, I responded with absolute calm. "You are the chief executive officer of a company that is currently bleeding millions of dollars because you put an intern in charge of your largest logistics expansion. The contract is non-negotiable, Henry. Take it or find someone else to fix Oliver's mess." Henry hung up on me. I knew he would try to fight it. He was a proud man, and signing that agreement would be the ultimate admission of his own failure. He spent the next week scrambling, trying to hire emergency crisis managers and logistics experts to repair the damage. But nobody could fix a system they did not build, especially when the key suppliers were actively refusing to cooperate. While Henry was busy wasting time and money trying to avoid my terms, something unexpected happened. My phone rang again, but this time it was not Henry. The caller ID displayed the main corporate number for Apex Dynamics, Vanguard's second-largest client and a massive player in the international manufacturing sector. I answered the call, and the voice on the other end belonged to the vice president of operations at Apex Dynamics. We had worked closely together during the early stages of Project Apollo. He did not waste time with small talk. "Richard," he said, his tone dead serious, "we heard you left Vanguard. We also see that their entire supply chain is currently falling apart. Our shipments are delayed, our inventory is backing up, And every time we call your old office, we get transferred to some kid who sounds like he is reading from a script. I nodded, even though he could not see me. That would be Oliver, I said. He is the new strategic lead. The vice president scoffed loudly. We do not care what his title is. We care about our freight. Are you consulting independently now? I confirmed that I had recently launched my own firm. The vice president did not hesitate. Good. We are terminating our contract with Vanguard effective immediately. They breached our service level agreements 3 days ago, and their legal team is too disorganized to even realize it. We want to bring your new firm on board to manage our logistics directly. Can you take us on? I smiled, realizing the massive shift that was happening. Henry had spent his entire career believing that the Vanguard name was the only thing clients valued. He thought the corporate logo on the letterhead was what secured the multi-million-dollar deals. He was about to learn a very painful lesson about loyalty and competence.
I can absolutely take you on.
I will have my legal team draft a service agreement and send it over by the end of the day. We finalized the details within 24 hours. Apex Dynamics officially terminated their partnership with Vanguard Supply Network, citing gross mismanagement and failure to deliver on contractual obligations. They transferred their entire logistical portfolio to my new consulting firm. It was a massive win, a deal large enough to instantly validate my new business and secure my financial future for years to come. I did not even need Henry to sign my aggressive consulting agreement anymore. I had just taken one of his biggest revenue streams directly out of his hands, entirely legally, simply by being the person who actually knew how to do the work. The next morning, Henry found out. I could only imagine the absolute chaos that erupted in the executive suites when the termination notice from Apex Dynamics arrived. Henry tried frantically to save the relationship. According to my former colleagues, he personally drove to the Apex Dynamics headquarters, demanding a meeting with their executive board. He promised them heavy discounts, prioritized shipping lanes, and anything else he could think of to keep their business. But the vice president of operations simply looked at him across the conference table and delivered the final, crushing blow. We are not interested in discounts, Henry. We are interested in competence. And we have already signed an exclusive management contract with Richard's new firm. That was the exact moment Henry realized his empire was crumbling, and he was the one who had handed me the sledgehammer. 6 months passed, and the landscape of the local logistics industry had completely transformed. My consulting firm grew at a speed that genuinely surprised me. Once the news spread that Apex Dynamics had jumped ship to follow me, other frustrated clients began reaching out. They were all tired of the delays, the excuses, and the general incompetence that had taken over Vanguard's supply network since my departure. I spent my days building a new team, a group of dedicated, hardworking professionals who actually understood the value of the work we were doing. I made sure to hire people based on their expertise and their drive, entirely ignoring who their parents were or what country clubs they attended. We were successful because we delivered actual results, not just empty promises wrapped in corporate buzzwords. Meanwhile, the situation at Vanguard had gone from bad to catastrophic. The loss of the North Axis contract and the massive Apex Dynamics account had created a massive financial hole that Henry simply could not fill. According to the industry grapevine, Oliver had quietly resigned or was asked to leave just 2 months after taking over Project Apollo. The grand expansion that was supposed to secure Henry's legacy had completely stalled, turning into a massive financial drain instead of a revenue generator. Vanguard was forced to downsize, closing several regional warehouses and laying off a significant portion of their administrative staff. The board of directors was reportedly furious, and rumors were circulating that Henry was being pressured into an early retirement. He had traded his most competent asset for a golf buddy's son, and it had cost him nearly half of his business empire. Sarah and I watched the fallout from a comfortable distance. She felt a brief twinge of sadness for her father's situation, but she also recognized that his downfall was entirely self-inflicted. He had operated with a profound lack of respect for the people who actually built his wealth, and the market had finally corrected his arrogance. We never celebrated his failures, But we did not offer our sympathy either. We simply moved forward, focusing on the new life we were building together. Our evenings were no longer interrupted by emergency phone calls from the warehouse. I was no longer exhausted and stressed, carrying the weight of a multi-million-dollar company on my shoulders for a man who refused to acknowledge my existence. I was finally building something for myself. In late November, my new firm was invited to a major regional business gala, an annual event that gathered all the top executives and supply chain leaders in the state. A year ago, I had attended this exact same event as Henry's shadow, standing quietly in the background while he shook hands and took credit for the operational efficiencies I had implemented. This year, everything was different. When Sarah and I walked into the grand ballroom, people approached me directly. I was greeted by department heads, shipping executives, and potential clients who had heard about my rapid success with Apex Dynamics. I was no longer the invisible son-in-law managing the dirty work behind the scenes. I was Richard, the chief executive officer of a highly successful consulting firm, recognized and respected for my own accomplishments. Midway through the evening, the host took the stage to announce the annual industry awards. As they listed off the major achievements in supply chain innovation, several speakers mentioned the rapid, seamless restructuring my firm had pulled off for our new clients. People clapped, some raised their glasses in my direction, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt a deep, genuine sense of professional pride. As the applause faded, I turned around to grab a fresh drink from a passing waiter. And that is when I saw him. Henry was standing near the back of the room, near the coat check, holding a half-empty glass of scotch. He looked older. The aggressive, arrogant posture he always carried had completely vanished, replaced by a slight slump in his shoulders. His expensive suit seemed a little too large for him now. He was watching me. He had likely watched the entire room acknowledge my expertise, the very expertise he had taken for granted for 3 long years. Our eyes met across the crowded ballroom. He did not smile, and he did not raise his glass. He just stared, the reality of his massive miscalculation plainly visible on his face. He finally understood exactly what he had lost, and he knew he had nobody to blame but himself. I did not walk over to gloat. I did not need to rub my success in his face or demand an apology. I just gave him a brief, polite nod, turned my back, and walked over to join my wife and my new colleagues. True revenge in the professional world does not require screaming matches or dramatic confrontations. It does not require you to actively destroy the person who wronged you. The absolute greatest victory you can ever achieve is simply removing your talent from their disposal, building your own empire, and letting them watch from the sidelines as you become wildly successful without them. I had spent 3 years waiting for Henry to realize my worth, but the truth was, the only person who needed to realize my worth was me. And now that I was never going to let anyone undervalue me again.